What kind of man stops in the middle of Central Park because two boys are trying to sell a broken toy car? And what if, just for once, it's the boys who change his life? This isn't a story about charity. It's about what happens when grief meets courage, and a stranger chooses to stay instead of walk away. Because sometimes the smallest act, like buying a toy, can become the moment that rebuilds an entire family. Let me tell you what really happened that day, and why it still matters. On a gray October morning, the benches near Central Park's East Meadow were mostly empty. Commuters hurried past, bundled in coats, eyes down, minds elsewhere. But one bench had life on it. Two boys, no older than 10, sat close together. One held a red toy car in his hands, not the plastic kind you'd toss in a bin, but a solid metal-bodied relic, worn at the edges, still gleaming faintly when the light caught its curves. Eli Parker rubbed his thumb along the roof of the car, then glanced at his twin brother, Noah. "Somebody's gotta want it," he muttered. His voice carried more hope than confidence. Noah didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the crowd, scanning for someone kind-looking, or at least not in too much of a hurry. They hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. But food wasn't what mattered most right now. Their mother, Angela, had barely opened her eyes that morning. Her breathing was shallow, her forehead hot. The boys didn't know much about sickness, but they knew enough to be afraid. James Whitmore was never supposed to be in the park that day. A delay at a midtown boardroom had left him with a rare hour of unscheduled time, and his driver had suggested a walk. Just 10 minutes to stretch the legs, breathe cold air, remember life outside of mergers. James had nodded, distracted. He wasn't used to slowing down, wasn't used to noticing. But he noticed the car, not because of the toy itself, though it was the kind he hadn't seen since his own son, Daniel, was alive. No, what caught his eye was how tightly the older twin gripped it, like letting go of it meant letting go of something bigger. He stopped walking. The boys noticed. Eli stood up. "Sir? You like cars?" His voice cracked mid-sentence. "We got one. It's real strong, doesn't break easy." James looked at them, then the car, then back again. The boys were thin. Not ragged, not dirty, just quiet in a way that made you listen harder. He asked softly, "Why are you selling it?" Noah looked away. Eli hesitated. "Our mom's not feeling good. We need to get her medicine. We don't got enough." James didn't speak right away. His fingers brushed over the car. He remembered Daniel playing on hardwood floors, racing tiny wheels across the grain, laughing like time was endless. "How much are you asking?" James said. Eli blinked, unsure. 50. I think that's enough for the pills, I think." James reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a fold of bills. "Not 50. More. A lot more." He handed it over without counting. "I'll take good care of it," he said, holding the car gently. Eli stared at the cash, too shocked to speak. Noah's lips parted, but no words came. James smiled, an expression that felt foreign on his face, and turned to leave. But he'd only taken a few steps when something pulled at his chest. Not guilt. Not pity, something older, deeper. He stopped again, turned back. "Where do you live?" he asked. Eli hesitated. "On 84th, not far. Apartment 3B. James nodded. "Would it be all right if I walked with you?" The boys exchanged a glance. Then Noah said, "Okay, but Mom's sleeping. She doesn't like noise." James said nothing more. He followed them quietly through the park path, not realizing that with every step his world, the one he thought was final, was already beginning to change. The hallway was dim, the paint peeling in long strips like forgotten paper. James ducked slightly as he stepped into the apartment. The ceiling fan above the tiny kitchen spun lazily, clicking every few seconds like an old clock that no longer kept time. The air was thick, not with any smell in particular, just a stillness that clung to the skin. Noah led him through the narrow space. Eli pointed to the corner. "That's the fridge, but it's not real cold. We turn it off sometimes when the lights go out." James nodded slowly. He wasn't looking at the fridge. He was looking at the folded blanket on the floor that clearly served as someone's bed. And beyond that, a small bedroom door, slightly ajar. "Mom's in there," Noah said quietly. James stepped closer, his shoes careful not to disturb the quiet. Through the open crack, he saw her. Angela Parker, mid-30s, lay curled on a worn mattress pushed against the wall. Her breathing was labored. Her face glistened with sweat, and one hand hung limply off the side of the bed. There was no sound in the room, just the faint hum of a distant neighbor's TV. James didn't move. He had sat in million-dollar homes, hospital boardrooms, private jets, but nothing prepared him for this. For the sight of a woman clearly too sick to get help, raising 2 children, who had no one else to call. Angela stirred, her eyes opened, unfocused, scanning. "Eli?" she whispered. "I'm here, Mom," Eli said, rushing to her side. "I got the money. We can get your medicine now." Mr. Whitmore helped. James didn't correct him. He didn't know why. Angela tried to sit up. Her arms gave out. James stepped forward instinctively, stopping himself just short of touching her shoulder. "You need a doctor," he said, "right now." Angela blinked. Her voice was hoarse. "We'll be all right. Just need time." James turned to the boys. "Have you called anyone? A clinic? Family?" Eli looked down. "No one picks up, and we can't afford the ambulance." Noah added, "Last time Mom went, they said we had to wait hours. She got worse." James took a breath. Every instinct he'd trained for decades, keep things efficient, clean, distant, was at war with the man standing here now. "I'm calling my driver," he said. "We're going to the hospital. Right now." Angela tried to object, but he cut her off, gently but firmly. "Let me help. Please. You don't owe me anything." As he dialed, he walked into the living room and stared at the toy car still clutched in his hand. In the soft morning light, the red paint glowed. James remembered Daniel again. Not the accident, not the funeral, but the mornings before school, when a boy's laughter filled his house. The sound of footsteps behind him broke the moment. Noah held a backpack. "We'll bring her stuff, just in case they keep her overnight." James nodded. Smart thinking. Moments later, James carried Angela down the stairs, his arms steady despite her frail weight. She murmured something he couldn't understand. The boys followed, clutching hands, the red car now tucked into Noah's jacket pocket. The emergency room was buzzing, as always. Nurses in scrubs moved fast, but never frantic. Families huddled in corners. Security guards leaned near vending machines, keeping eyes on everything and nothing. But when James walked through the automatic doors carrying Angela in his arms, the front desk nurse noticed immediately. "Is she responsive?" the nurse asked, already rising from her chair. "Barely," James replied. "Fever, shallow breathing, possible infection." "Is she your wife?" the nurse asked, scanning her monitor. James hesitated, just long enough to let the truth catch up to him, but not long enough for the moment to pass. "Yes," he said. "Her name's Angela Whitmore. Please, she needs help now." The nurse typed quickly. "All right, Mr. Whitmore. Triage will call you in 1 minute. Have a seat there." James didn't sit. He stood by the double doors, watching through the small window as a gurney was rolled out. 2 nurses took Angela from his arms gently, lifting her with practiced ease. He caught her eyes just before they closed again. There was no panic, just resignation, as if she'd already said her goodbyes somewhere in the silence of her apartment. The boys clung to each other in the corner. They hadn't said a word since the car ride. James approached them slowly. "They're going to take care of her now. The best people are here." Eli finally looked up. "They won't make her wait, right?" James shook his head. "Not this time." He followed the nurses down the hall. When the receptionist asked for insurance, James handed over his card. Private billing, no restrictions. He signed whatever was put in front of him. No questions, just speed. Angela was taken to a room and connected to an IV. Her vitals were checked, blood drawn, a monitor placed at her bedside. A young doctor entered moments later, introduced himself as Dr. Levins, and explained the situation with crisp efficiency. "Severe bacterial infection. She's dehydrated, oxygen's low, but we caught it early enough. She needs IV antibiotics and fluids. Could have been fatal in 48 hours. Maybe less." James nodded. "Do what you have to do." When the doctor left, James stepped back into the hallway and sat on a bench. For the first time that day, he exhaled slowly. Not the kind of breath you take after work or before sleep, but the kind that comes when something fragile is no longer hanging by a thread. Across from him, Eli and Noah sat with knees pulled close to their chests. Eli stared straight ahead. Noah's eyes were closed, lips moving silently. A prayer, maybe. James remembered holding Daniel in hospital rooms like this. Not because he was sick, but because Daniel liked to visit the children's ward with him. Just to say hi. He'd said once, passing out toy race cars to kids with IVs in their arms. James had watched proudly, never imagining he'd bury that smile in silence years later. He stood up, walked to the boys. "She's stable," he said. They're going to keep her here for a couple of days, but she's in good hands. Eli nodded. Noah didn't react. You hungry? James asked. Both boys looked at each other. Then Noah spoke softly. Is it okay if we stay? James paused. He wasn't sure if they meant the hospital or with him. Maybe both. You're not going anywhere, he said. Not without me. 3 days later, the front door of the Whitmore estate opened with a creak it hadn't made in years. James stepped aside to let the boys in first. Eli paused, looking up at the high ceilings and the long hallway lined with framed black and white photos. Noah trailed behind, carrying a small backpack, his grip tight on the toy car they once tried to sell. The house was quiet, not with peace but with distance, a kind of silence that had settled in over time, thick and polite. The kind that doesn't ask questions. That morning, James had picked the boys up from the hospital himself. Angela was improving, but the doctors needed her to stay under observation until her vitals held steady. She had tried to protest, until James gently promised, I'll keep them safe, and they'll be back before you know it. Eli's eyes scanned the large living room. This place is big, James smiled faintly. It used to feel full. He didn't add, not anymore, not since Daniel. Not since the sound of footsteps disappeared from the upstairs hall and the echo of chess pieces stopped clicking across the oak table by the window. Noah touched a glass bowl on the console table. You got any food? James blinked, then laughed, not out of amusement but from the sheer honesty of the question. I think I can find something. In the kitchen, James opened a cupboard and stared at rows of unopened boxes. Most of them expired. He moved to the freezer. Frozen meals, restaurant leftovers from weeks ago, untouched. He reached for his phone. Let's order something. You like burgers? Both boys nodded quickly. While they waited for the food, Eli wandered through the den. What's this room for? He asked, running his hand along the arm of a dusty leather chair. It used to be the reading room, James answered. Then the chess room. Then nothing. Noah settled onto the couch. You live here alone? James nodded. For a while now. Why? Eli asked, not out of rudeness, but the way children do, when they haven't yet learned which questions to hold back. James looked at him, considered brushing it off. But something in Eli's face, a kind of brave softness, made him answer. Because I lost people. And when that happens, sometimes it's easier not to talk. The boys didn't press further. Instead, Eli quietly picked up a dusty chess set from the nearby shelf and set the pieces down on the board. You know how to play? He asked. James raised an eyebrow. I used to. Eli pushed a pawn forward. Then it's your move. The game was clumsy at first. James forgot openings. Eli forgot rules. Noah kept trying to move both players' pieces. But as the evening grew darker, the sound of voices and laughter began to fill the corners of the room again. Not loud, not planned, just real. Later that night, James tucked blankets onto the pull-out sofa in the guest room. Eli curled under the covers without fuss. Noah hesitated. Can you leave the door open? He asked. Of course, James said. Noah added, and the hallway light too, just a little. James left the door ajar and dimmed the sconce outside. He stood in the hall for a moment, listening. The boys were whispering now, about the chess match, the burger they ate too fast, and whether their mom would like this place. Their voices made the silence feel less permanent. The days slipped into each other with surprising ease. What started as a temporary stay slowly stretched into a new routine. Mornings began with cereal on the kitchen island, Noah humming songs from old cartoons while Eli read the back of the cereal box like it was scripture. James, always an early riser, found himself lingering longer by the coffee machine. Not because he needed more caffeine, but because he didn't want to miss their voices filling the space. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when the question came. Eli was looking at framed photos on the living room wall. One, in particular, caught his attention, a black and white image of a boy no older than he was, holding a kite in a wide-open field. Is that your son? He asked. James didn't answer immediately. He walked over, eyes on the photo. Yes, he finally said. Daniel. Noah joined his brother. Where is he now? The room grew still. James kept his voice steady. He passed away, that a long time ago. Car accident. His mom, too. The boys looked down. They didn't speak, but their silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was respectful. That kind of silence children rarely know how to offer unless they've lived through their own kind of loss. James turned to them, searching their faces. Then, without fully knowing why, he added, "The room upstairs was his. I haven't been in there since." Eli glanced toward the staircase. "Is it locked?" "No," James replied, "just closed." That night, after dinner, James walked past the staircase like he always did. But he paused. The hallway was quiet. The boys were watching TV, curled up with blankets. The air in the house felt warmer now, less hollow. He took the first step, then the next. At the end of the hallway, he stood in front of a wooden door, hand hovering over the knob. He turned it. The room smelled faintly of old paper and fabric. The shelves were still full. Books lined up neatly, baseball caps hung in place, a model airplane frozen mid-flight on the ceiling. On the desk was a small wooden box. Inside it, a deck of playing cards, a pencil with teeth marks, a note in blocky handwriting. "You're stronger than you think, Dad." James sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. The silence didn't feel punishing anymore. It felt like permission. For years he'd feared that opening this room would be a betrayal. Now he realized the real betrayal would have been never walking back in, a knock at the door. "Can we come in?" Eli asked softly. James nodded. They didn't say much. Noah walked over and picked up a book with a rocket ship on the cover. "I like this kind of stuff," James smiled. "So did he?" Eli sat beside James. "You think he would have liked us?" James looked at him, eyes tired but kind. "I think he would have wanted me to open this door a long time ago." By the second week, the mansion no longer felt like a museum. It felt lived in. The silence that once wrapped around its hallways like old velvet was replaced by the sound of socked feet running down stairs, spoons clinking in cereal bowls, and the low, steady rhythm of two boys asking questions about everything. James didn't realize how quickly habits could change, or how easily the heart could adapt when given something to protect. Every evening followed a rhythm. After dinner, they played chess on the old board by the window. Eli was getting sharper. He no longer sacrificed his queen so quickly. Noah, uninterested in rules, would often narrate the matches like a sports announcer, making sound effects and pretending to be the crowd. James didn't correct him. He let him talk, because the sound was good for the house, and for him. Angela called often now, her voice steadier each day. She asked what the boys ate, whether they were sleeping enough, if they were behaving. James answered everything with a calm she picked up on, even through the phone. "You're good with them," she said once. "I didn't expect that." "Neither did I," he replied quietly. There were small things that changed James without him noticing. He started cooking. Simple meals at first, then more elaborate ones when Noah said, "This soup tastes better than the one in the box." He dusted off the bookshelf, not because it was dirty but because Eli had started pulling down old adventure novels. He found himself checking the porch light at night, not out of habit, but out of care. One morning, James woke up to find both boys already dressed, backpacks ready. "You have school today?" he asked, surprised. Eli looked up from the table. "We enrolled ourselves. We called the local district. Mom always said we got to keep up, no matter what." James didn't argue. He drove them to school that day, waited at the corner to watch them disappear into the building. Something in him resisted leaving, so he stayed until the last bell rang, parked across the street, answering emails he didn't really care about anymore. That night, after they were asleep, he walked into the study. There was an old calendar pinned above the desk. Most dates were blank, but he flipped to the current month and circled the 28th, quietly, with no fanfare. It was Daniel's birthday. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stood there, staring at the circle. Then, slowly, he reached into the desk drawer and pulled out a photograph. Daniel holding the red toy car, the same one now sitting on Noah's nightstand. He carried the photo to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned on the counter. Angela called that evening. "I miss them," she said. "But I think this is the first time I've slept properly in months." James didn't reply immediately. Then finally, "They're okay. You raised them well." Angela was quiet for a beat. Then she said something unexpected. "You sound different." James looked at the kitchen, now full of their traces. Drawings on the fridge, school notices on the table, a chessboard left mid-game. "Maybe I am," he said. The door to Daniel's room no longer creaked. James had oiled the hinges quietly one morning while the boys were at school, wiping the wood clean with slow, careful hands. What was once a sealed space had become something else now. Not a shrine, not a museum. A room re-entered, a memory allowed to breathe. He didn't announce the change, just left the door open. That afternoon, Eli wandered in holding a worn notebook. "Can I do my homework here?" he asked. James nodded. "Of course." Noah followed, dragging a chair. "I'm gonna read, but only if this lamp works." It did, and as the sun faded outside, the room glowed with a soft amber hue. Books were taken from the shelves, sketch pads opened. A quiet filled the space, not the suffocating silence of grief, but the soft hum of focus, of children at work. James sat by the door for a while, watching them. They didn't ask about Daniel, but their presence honored him more than any words could. Later that week, James brought in a framed photo of Daniel, the same one he'd kept buried in his desk drawer. He placed it gently on the shelf near the window. Next to it, a baseball that still held Daniel's handwriting. "Don't throw me unless you mean it." It made Noah laugh. "I like him," he said simply. James smiled. "Me too." That night, while tucking the boys into bed, Eli hesitated. "Can we sleep in Daniel's room sometimes?" James looked at him. "You don't have to ask." "Yeah," Noah added. "It feels nice in there." Angela called not long after, her voice brighter now, even playful. "You sound out of breath." "I was upstairs," James said. "Doing what?" "Letting go," he answered, without thinking. There was silence on the line, but the kind of silence that feels safe to share. A few days later, James stood in the doorway again, alone this time. He looked around. A chessboard half played, 2 pencils on the floor, a comic book sprawled across the bed. He didn't feel like he'd replaced anything. He felt like something that had been paused was simply continuing. He walked over to the desk and pulled open the top drawer. Inside, folded carefully, was a note he hadn't seen in years. Daniel's handwriting, still boyish but steady. "Dear Dad, if you ever feel alone, remember I'm right here. Let someone in." James closed the drawer slowly. The next morning, while the boys were getting dressed for school, James called out from the hallway, "You two better not be late. We've got a game to finish tonight." Eli poked his head out of the room. "You're gonna lose," James smirked. "Not if I castle early." Noah groaned. "You always castle. It's boring." "Then bring something better," James said. "This house plays to win." Angela came home on a Thursday morning. The doctors gave her the all clear, though her steps were still slow and her voice a touch softer than before. James picked her up himself. The ride back was quiet but not strained. There were no dramatic reunions when they arrived. Just 2 boys rushing down the steps barefoot, crashing into their mother's arms like they'd been holding their breath the whole time she was gone. That night, Angela tucked them in for the first time in weeks. She sang the lullaby she used to sing when they were small. James stood outside the room, not listening in, just staying near. The next morning, over coffee, she said it without fanfare. "I think it's time we go." James didn't look up right away. "I'm feeling stronger," she continued, "and this was never meant to be permanent. The boys need structure. I need to find work again. We've already stayed longer than we should have." James stirred his coffee. "They've been happy here." Angela nodded. "And I'll always be grateful. But I don't want to take advantage of your kindness." He wanted to say it wasn't kindness, it was need. But they hadn't taken anything. That, if anything, they'd brought life back into a place that had been empty far longer than anyone should admit out loud. But the words stayed locked behind the old habits of restraint. The following days passed with polite tension. Angela began packing. Not much, just the essentials. The boys didn't ask questions. Maybe they sensed it. Maybe they'd been here before, in other places, with other goodbyes. One evening, James came home late from a meeting. He found Noah asleep on the couch, still in his school uniform. The TV was playing an old cartoon. Eli was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a chessboard in front of him. "You want to finish our game?" Eli asked without looking up. James sat down. They played in silence for a few minutes. Then Eli asked, "Are we really leaving?" James stared at the board. "Your mom thinks it's best." "What do you think?" James hesitated. I'm scared." Eli looked at him, surprised. "Scared of the quiet coming back," James said. "Of walking down the stairs and not hearing anything. Of walking past Daniel's room and forgetting it ever opened again." Eli didn't answer. He just moved his rook and said, "Check." That night, James stood on the back porch. Angela joined him, arms crossed, sweater draped over her shoulders. The garden was quiet, the air sharp. "I never asked you," she said. "Why did you follow them that day in the park?" James looked down at his hands. "Because they were doing something I'd forgotten how to do, believing people still cared." Angela studied him for a long moment. Then, "You've been more than good to us." "I wasn't trying to be good," James said. "I was trying to feel something again, and I did. Because of you." She looked away, but not to hide. "You know," he said, voice quieter now, "if you wanted to stay permanently, I wouldn't just say yes, I'd say thank you." Angela turned back toward the house. The light from inside cast her shadow long across the steps. She didn't say yes, but she didn't keep packing the next day either. Spring arrived quietly that year. No grand blooms or parades of color, just warmer air, longer light, and the way laughter lingered a little longer on the back patio. By then, the bags were still under the bed. Angela hadn't moved out. No one mentioned it again. Something more real had taken root. The garden had been dormant for years. But now, patches of green returned under the boys' small efforts and James's quiet guidance. They planted tomatoes and lavender. Angela started putting chairs out each morning, even if no one sat in them yet. The space wasn't just used. It was shared. One Saturday morning, James asked Angela to take a walk with him. The boys were busy building a makeshift fort out of blankets and branches. Angela wiped her hands on a kitchen towel and followed. They walked in silence through the trimmed path behind the house, past the maple tree where Daniel once tied streamers, past the bench that had been empty for a decade. James stopped near the small pond where koi still circled, waiting for someone who hadn't fed them in years. "I used to think my life ended the day I lost them," James said. Angela didn't interrupt. But somehow, without knowing it, I was just paused. She glanced at him, unsure where he was leading. "I don't want to be paused anymore," he said. "And I don't want you or the boys to feel like guests here." "You're not." He pulled something from his coat pocket. Not a ring box, not a grand gesture, just a folded paper. Inside was a drawing, crude, colored with crayon. 3 stick figures holding hands, one taller than the others. In childish scrawl underneath, "Us, forever." Signed, Noah. "I didn't ask him to draw this," James said, "but he gave it to me 2 nights ago." Angela unfolded the paper carefully. Her fingers lingered at the crease, smoothing it flat. "I'm not asking for an answer now," James continued. "But if you ever want to make this real, this family, we don't need a courthouse or a crowd. Just us, here." Angela didn't cry. She wasn't that kind of woman. But her voice was low when she said, "You're not the man I met in the hospital lobby." James looked down. "No, I think that man didn't know how much more he could feel." A week later, without announcements or invitations, the family stood in the garden under the morning sun. Eli wore a tie that kept twisting sideways. Noah carried a single flower he'd picked from the edge of the lawn. Angela wore a dress borrowed from a neighbor, simple and soft, her hair pinned up with quiet grace. James didn't wear a suit, just his usual coat, freshly pressed. In his hand, he held the toy car, not as a symbol of the past, but of the moment that led him here. They spoke no vows aloud, just shared a look, a hand held, a nod that meant, yes, we're here. We choose this, not because it's perfect, but because it's ours. Afterward, they sat on the grass and ate sandwiches. The boys played chess on a blanket. Angela leaned her head against James's shoulder. In the quiet that followed, James looked around the garden. It had changed, not because of what they planted, but because of who had stayed. If you've ever been judged too quickly, or felt like your story was finished before you could rewrite it, remember this. Sometimes it takes losing everything to know what truly matters. And the truth? It doesn't need to shout. It just needs to arrive and be seen. Type 1 if you've ever felt powerless in the face of an unfair goodbye. Type 2 if you still believe kindness can build a family. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe for more true-hearted narratives that remind us some endings are just beginnings in disguise.